Hi, I'm Mike McMahon, the showrunner and creator of Star Trek Lower Decks, and you are watching TrekCulture.
Well, hello, hello, hello. How are we all, and how is everyone today? You are very welcome here to our special live edition of the Ups and Downs. So, very, very quickly, I'll go into the why and everything of why we're here in a moment. I just want to say a big, massive thank you so far to everyone who is joining us. I've been having a look at the comments there. You're wonderful. You're awesome. Special shout out to the people who have included their pets on this as well. So that's even more brilliant. So, as you can see, once again, I am somewhere out in the universe. Anyone who's been paying attention on social media over the last couple of days will have seen that I have been greeted at airports. It's been wonderful. But the most important thing, the reason we're all here, is a very happy Sisko Day to you all. I am so honored to be asked to be a part of this year. It really, really means a lot to me because I don't think I've made any secret of the fact that Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek and always has been. And perhaps always will be. Who knows? There's many more Star Treks to come. And of course, now I will be referring back to. So here's the bit that you don't always see in the finished videos, which is the reams of notes that I have sitting around me at all times. And the reason I picked this up right here is because happy Stardate 46388.2, or May 22nd, which is, of course, the Sisko Day. It's why we're all here. I'm going to jump in now, and we're going to do our retro ups and downs for probably the most relevant episode that there could be for the day that's in it, which is, of course, Move Along Home, which I think is probably the most important Sisko episode that has ever been produced. No, seriously, people are staring daggers at me here. We are, of course, going to be going through Emissary. Emissary is not just a critical episode for Star Trek Deep Space Nine for obvious reasons, but for Star Trek as a whole, and for reasons that, of course, will become more and more apparent as we go on. Just really, really quickly again, so I can see the comments here beside me, so thank you very much, and I will try and answer as I go along. So if you are dropping comments there, just make sure, shout out, you're awesome, wonderful. And before I go on as well, I've said before I go on a few times, please make sure that you're following the Seventh Rule on various socials as well, because they, of course, spearheaded this entire event that's happening. They are awesome. Okay, cool. Shall we jump in? Have you heard of a little thing called Wolf 359? So, there is the entire premise. The jumping off point of Emissary is, of course, the Battle of Wolf 359, which makes it immediately this spin-off from this huge piece of Star Trek history, one that has, of course, only got bigger as the years have gone on with the various additions to lore. But if you think about it, in a very real way, this episode, Emissary, was the first depiction of the battle on screen. Because, of course, in the Next Generation, what we saw was the Enterprise being taken out of action so that it couldn't partake in the battle. Well, one member of the crew did partake in the battle, but I don't think he really likes to talk about it. Our first up of the week, of course, Wolf 359. It was an awesome, banging way to start the episode, to start the show, and to let us know that it was going to be a little bit different from what we'd seen before. Our second up of the week, we see straight away Locutus completely fills the screen. We then get that close-up of just Avery Brooks's badass face. Doesn't look very happy. I suppose that's kind of fair. He's on a ship that's getting the absolute tar beaten out of it by these cyborgs. Sounds Swedish. There's a lot going on in this scene because we are establishing, not only are we establishing a new ship, we're establishing a new crew, but our lead character, here we go, all in one. Hang on, who's that behind him? What's Martok doing sitting captaining a starship? J.G. Hertzler, of course, played the Vulcan captain of the USS Saratoga in those opening scenes and turns up later on in the episode as well. I just think it's something that, for whatever reason, tends to slip my mind. Sometimes when I think back to Emissary, we think about there's so much going on with our Starfleet crew, our main US9. But I forget we get Martok so early on in the show. Well, I mean, it doesn't stick around for very long. This scene is very different, if you like, from how we establish the characters that have come before. If you particularly compare the opening of Emissary to the opening of Encounter at Farpoint, and I know some of you will have heard the title Encounter at Farpoint, and your eye would have twitched there with the threat that maybe I'm going to make you watch it again. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to. I do have an awful lot of love for that episode. But Encounter at Farpoint introduces us to a captain who is very duty-bound. There's no real rush going on around. He's taking this absolutely glorious new ship out for a flight. Everyone's got time. We can all have a chat. The Saratoga, as we will quickly learn, is on its last few minutes of life. The first officer of the Saratoga is not just a Starfleet officer who's trying to save his crew. He's a family man who is trying to save his family. And once, it all happens so quickly, but once he becomes aware that the Saratoga is lost, he turns to his colleagues and said, we've got to get the civilians off the ship. And for me, the establishment of Sisko as a character is another up. Not simply an up for the fact that, of course, he cares about the civilians. Of course he would. But we see so instantly that he's a family man as well. Because as he's running through the corridors, and of course he stops and sees the other civilians, he knows them. But he goes, where is Jennifer? The opening of this episode establishes grief and loss in a way that we hadn't seen in meeting a lead character in a Star Trek before. And I suppose there's perhaps shades of it in Pike in The Cage, but his loss is different. He's dealing with the pressures of command. Sisko gets right up front and personal to the dangers of bringing your family with you out into space. It's kind of a scary moment, and it is an absolute way to say, welcome to Deep Space Nine. This ain't your daddy's Trek. I want to give a shout out as well to his colleague, who is the Bolian officer. Now, in beta canon, there is a couple of different names for this officer, because I feel like he deserves a name. So if you look at the Michael Jan Friedman book Saratoga, he is Lieutenant Tsar. But if you look at the novelization for Emissary or the video game Crossroads of Time, he is called Hranuk. And then there are, of course, other variations where he's called Hranuk Tsar. So I choose to call him Hranuk Tsar. And the reason I want to single him out is because he gets a massive up from me, because he is the one that saves Sisko's life. He is the one that manages to pull the officer away from Jennifer's body and gets him onto that escape pod. If it wasn't for Lieutenant Tsar, who knows what the Alpha Quadrant might have looked like down the line. So credit where credit is due. Big up to the Bolians. We then jump forward a couple of years, because then, of course, you have Sisko is en route to his new posting, and we're introduced to Cirroc Lofton's Jake Sisko for the first time. And I think, again, if for the day that's in it for everything, take a massive up Cirroc Lofton for Jake Sisko. It's a simple scene that it's them on the holodeck. It's calm, it's peaceful. It's a sort of a breath of air after this crazy battle. And as they walk through the corridors of the ship, we are shown for the first time the glorious wagon wheel in space, the glorious station of Deep Space Nine, and the first hints of that theme tune are played. So my next up is for Dennis McCarthy's theme tune for Deep Space Nine. Every so often, we'll have a chat in TrekCulture about what's our favorite opening credits and what's our favorite theme tune. And normally, it came down to myself and Chris sort of locking wits in a battle for the ages, because Chris will die on this hill. It is Star Trek Voyager all the way along, and I respect that, but I've always been a DS9 man. And funnily enough, I actually prefer seasons 1 to 3, that lonely dirge, that lonely theme, to really highlight the fact that this is a very different Star Trek. It's slower, it's more contemplative, and this station is lonely. It's very, very lonely. And of course, things will change as the show goes along, but we didn't know that yet. As you can see, there's Chris there going, Voyager, Voyager. I respect you. I respect you. I just want to take a quick second to say hello everyone in the comments. Hello, Melissa. Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're enjoying the Sisko Day. Once on board the station, we're introduced so quickly to so many different characters. And of course, I'm going to be talking about them all throughout the course of this ups and downs. But I just have to give a whopper of an up to Nana Visitors, Major Kira Nerys. Of course. When we're introduced to her in the pilot in Emissary, she is so completely the Kira that is sort of the core of the character we would come to know and love. Now, obviously, she develops and she both mellows and in some ways hardens over the 7 years as well. But the very core of her is there as she is in the office. I like that. Maybe say up for every main cast member. I mean, I'm not going to necessarily disagree. But when you see her, I love that moment. Don't ask, maybe then don't ask my opinion if you don't want to hear the answer. James Cyrus, in hindsight, I like Nana's portrayal over what should have been Rolaran's continuation. Now, that's the big thing, because it's well known, I think, at this stage, that the initial concept of the first officer character in Deep Space Nine was going to be Rolaran. And Michelle Forbes was not in she didn't want to commit to an ongoing series at that point. And look, there's a part of me laments the 7 seasons of Rolaran that we never got. But I would never sacrifice Kira Nerys for any reason. If it was a case of you had to pick one or the other, I couldn't sacrifice Kira. Just very quickly, Sir Newt, what makes today Sisko Day? Today is May 22nd, which is established as the day that Sisko took command of Deep Space Nine. That is why it is today. Now, I'm saying I do love the scene. So they're sitting there in the office, and Sisko and Kira are talking about the Federation's role here in Bajoran space. And Sisko, in a way, with all of the baggage that he's carrying, and with all of the weight of the importance of this mission, there's still a little, I'm going to call it Starfleet naivete. Why would anyone ever turn down Starfleet's help? I couldn't imagine. And as he says, we're here to help. And Kira says something that I don't think he was expecting at that moment, which is, that's exactly what the Cardassians said 15 years ago. Or 50 years, well, 15 years ago. 50 years ago. And that's, again, there it is, in Deep Space Nine. That's the difference. As Deep Space Nine went on, DS9 would be the one to explore the darker side of Paradise. And we would see these in episodes like The Maquis. Much later on, we would see it in Homefront, Paradise Lost. It's about Lena Morgan 60 years ago. No, you're exactly right. Sorry, you're dead right. Thank you. And you would see that exploration as the show went on. But it's right there. It's in the pilot episode, which again speaks to the strength of this script. We are then called to the Promenade, and we get to meet Odo. So, taken up, of course, Odo. But we get that great scene where we're introduced to Nog as well. Taken up Nog. Of course, sadly departed Aaron Eisenberg. It's just brilliant, remained from his first moment to the last in Deep Space Nine, absolutely brilliant. And just that moment, kind of running through the corridors, and we get that whip and throws it straight at Odo's face. I was watching this in preparation for this today, and when Odo reverts back to his gelatinous state and it goes straight through his face, this felt to me like this is DS9 trying to show off what it can do, isn't it? Yeah, that's enough from me. We are, of course, we get that. Sisko fires his phaser, and Odo is very displeased that there be a phaser fired on the promenade. But, then we get introduced to Quark. You get character after character after character. And no, I didn't forget O'Brien. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about O'Brien as the episode goes along. I know we've already met him here. And as you were introduced to Quark, I couldn't help thinking of an interview that Armin Zimmerman gave years ago, where he spoke about one of the reasons he took on the role of Quark was as something of an apology for the first appearance of the Ferengi back in the last outpost in season 1 of The Next Generation. So season 1 of The Next Generation, obviously, there's sort of we'll throw everything at the wall, and we'll see what sticks. And the Ferengi were billed as they're going to be the next big bad. They're going to be the big threat and everything, and that just didn't really work then, did it? So this opportunity comes again to play Quark as the sort of the wheeler dealer, the used car salesman, as opposed to the hopped up gerbils of the last outpost. And from the beginning, you see Quark is established there already. Emissary hits so well, and it does it as much as it did in 1993, it does it in 2024 as well. Does it sound like I'm gushing? Who cares? I am. After we then go through the promenade, there's a bit more with Sisko and Kira chatting away, and we get a reminder that the Enterprise is docked, and Captain Picard is waiting to see Commander Sisko. Now, here's the thing. I can only imagine in 1993, I was there, I did watch it, but I won't lie, my memories are not massively clear. But I can only imagine people going, why is... he's been very disrespectful to our favorite captain, to Captain Picard. Oh, I couldn't believe. And he arrives on the Enterprise. He walks into the observation lounge. You see Picard sitting there with his lovely season 7 teapot, which I still want. And he says hello, and Sisko says, "It's been a long time." Picard goes, "Oh, have we met before?" "We met in battle at Wolf 359. I was on the Saratoga." Avery Brooks's deliverance of that line is a whopper of an up from me, because here again is Deep Space Nine going, this is not The Next Generation Part 2. This is not everyone gets along. And kudos to both actors in that scene, because Patrick Stewart, it's written all over his face once he realizes why Sisko is speaking to him the way that he does. Now, here's the thing as well, because we know that, an assimilated drone is not responsible for their actions. And knowing that, having that at the forefront of your mind is one thing, but learning to accept that is another thing. And what Sisko is doing is Sisko is standing in this room, and he is sitting in front of the face that murdered his wife. And with so little dialogue, that is conveyed so beautifully and so stark. And your heart breaks for Captain Picard. And if it's still early episode, so if perhaps your heart is not breaking for Sisko yet, it's certainly bruised for him, because frankly, I can see where he's coming from. It is, of course, a moment that was repeated to a certain extent, but I feel it was different enough in Star Trek Picard's 3rd season, when you have Shaw, who basically reads Picard the Riot Act as well. And he is able to speak to Picard a bit more blunt I thought it was a fabulous exploration of the character. Picard has always felt guilty about Locutus's actions, as first seen in Family. Mark, you're absolutely correct. And in a way, as I've said, in a way, it's not your responsibility, and yet. We do get a wonderful mention in this scene to the fact that Sisko has spent the last 3 years in Utopia Planitia. And of course, this one was a bit that wasn't up for me because of what we go on to learn. He wasn't sitting there idle in Utopia Planitia. He was designing a certain thing that, we wouldn't see for another couple of seasons to come. But it's so funny when you go back and you watch these episodes again. You go back and you get to see all of the breadcrumbs that are being dropped there. And also, I will say, you do start to see some of the slight inconsistencies that come with they were learning as they went. You know what I mean? There were things that would later become established as X or Y, and they appear in the pilot as something else altogether. And I'll just say, what rank is O'Brien this week? So, a little bit of a recap. What do we have going on? We have Sisko is in charge of the station. He has already met Odo, he's already met Major Kira, and he's already met Nog. By doing so, he had Nog thrown in the brig. In fairness to Sisko, Nog was breaking into, steal some ore samples. Why wouldn't he throw him in the brig? Then, what we have is Quark he's packing up. Quark, he owns a bar, but he doesn't want to own a bar in the middle of a dump, and that's what Deep Space Nine is when Sisko takes over, because the Cardassians have pulled out, and as O'Brien says, the Cardassians decided to have a little bit of fun as they left. Several Bajorans were killed as they tried to defend their shops. I mean, this is horrific. They're there to rebuild, and you have business owners who they're Ferengi. They live and die by commerce. And if there's no commerce, there is no reason to stay there. So Quark's packing up. He's going to go. So he's there to talk about getting Nog out of prison. And Sisko is having absolutely none of it. Sisko's different again. I'm reminded of a scene a little bit later on in Deep Space Nine where, Quark says to Sisko, "This is blackmail." And Sisko goes, "Yes, it is." And quite frankly, this is a bit like, you can stay. I want you to be a community leader. We need you to encourage the people to make a life here. We need you to be a part of the furniture. And Quark is like, this is, community leader. What are you talking about? And as Sisko not too delicately says it, it's like, yeah, it's that or Nog rots in jail for the next few years. Your call, mate. And then just leaves, and you get that brilliant moment of Odo going, I didn't think I was going to like him. Up. When Sisko then meets Kira is there helping. She's rolled her sleeves up. She's doing her best to, muck in. Because, as she says, there's people busy repairing the primary systems, but then you've got debris strewn all over the promenade. And, we get that kind of a sort of a joke that's not quite a joke, where Kira says to Sisko, I suppose Starfleet officers don't like to get their hands dirty. And so he picks up and mucks in. And I don't think this is the first thing to break down all of the barriers between them, but it certainly helps. It shows that Sisko is not just there to be an overseer, which is, of course, what Kira would have been used to. And they have this discussion. It's funny as well, just as a sidebar, it's funny that, of course, as I say, I'm going through my notes as well. Normally, you get to see me like, we've edited out these bits. So here's a peek behind the curtain. But so they have a discussion about effectively how provisional is this provisional government. This is leading on from Quark saying the provisional government's a little bit too provisional for my liking. And Sisko says, what happens if this government fails? And Kira talks about, if the government fails, you'll be gone in a week, and then that leads to civil war. there are stakes here. And perhaps this is because I've watched all of DS9 afterwards. It's because perhaps we've seen how serious this can be, that this one really hits the fact that, when she says Civil War, you believe her, and Sisko believes her. This is the funny thing. She generally she speaks about the Kai, the spiritual leader, and how it was the spirituality of Bajor that was the only thing that really held them all together during the occupation. And now that they don't have a common enemy, that threatens to fall apart. Only Opaka can bring them together. Enter the Vedic. The timing is brilliant, isn't it? It's like, what could possibly happen to make Kira trust Sisko in that moment? What if the Vedic wants to talk to Sisko? I mean, that's going to get her attention, and it does. I do like as well how it goes from earlier on, when Sisko, and here's why I mentioned one of the inconsistencies. So when Sisko arrives on the station, he exits the docking port through what we later learn is the Bajoran temple. Just little things like that, obviously they built this amazing set, and there are things that are established later on that maybe weren't established at the time. It's just funny. And also, I'm a nerd. I look at these things. But the reason I bring it up here is because earlier on you had that Vedic go, you must begin your journey to the prophets. And I kind of took from that, maybe come into the temple and have a chat. No, he meant get in a runabout and go to Bajor. Which I thought was like, okie dokie, all right then. And as he does, and we get that first glorious shot. And although it's in ruins, Bajor is absolutely beautiful. I'm still doing that pointing thing as if we've got live ups and downs going. Can you tell how much that is muscle memory at this point? So I hope you've enjoyed that. But we arrive on Bajor. It is slightly in ruins, and we are introduced to Camille Saviola's Kai Opaka. What an up. With relatively few appearances in Deep Space Nine, Opaka is a very established part of the lore. She's very, 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 very different from, let's just say, Kais who would follow. And you get a true sense of urgency, of insistence from her. She urges him to explore his pa, and of course, poor Sisko's like, pa, that sounds good. And I've always loved where the orb is hidden, and it's down under that holographic pool. I've always loved that, and of course today will be no different. This leads to one of my least favorite scenes in the episode, and it is my first down of the episode, and that's the first beach scene. So we have the experience with the orb, the Tear of the Prophet, as she calls it, and it brings Sisko back in time to the moment where he met Jennifer. And there's a lot to love in this scene. I do love he's standing there trying to figure everything out, and then suddenly, well, what happens when you stand on very hot sand? You can pretend you don't notice it for a while, but you're going to notice it, which he does, and it starts to burn his feet, and he runs over and ends up almost literally stumbling into Jennifer. And as cute as it is, and as momentous as it is, I say this with the greatest of love and respect, it is not the best example of acting from either character in this scene. We have Avery Brooks's "ow," which I will say though, very impressive octave range there, and Felicia M. Bell. It's difficult dialogue. It's difficult. To be very fair, it's difficult dialogue, and there's a second down, which, to be fair on both of them, it's because of that he says, my father was a gourmet chef, and I will have no hint or indication that Joseph Sisko has left us at this point in time, and I'm delighted that we do meet him later on. Sorry, I'm very insistent about this. The start of the scene is its weakness. I do quite like where it goes, and particularly what I think is one of perhaps the greatest pickup lines in, I think, romance history. When Jennifer asks Ben, "Do you use this on everyone?" And he goes, "Never before and never again." And I felt something there when he said that. I thought, okay, well, right. well, maybe. Now, just very quickly, Tarek, maybe Joseph Sisko was just taking a break from cooking and then went back to it later. You are correct. I choose to interpret it that way, and thank you very much. And Dave Gregory, really quick, I lean into that raw emotion. You don't get that, that usually, if ever, he's human and in love. I totally agree. And actually on that, my next up is the genuine pain on Sisko's face as the vision comes to an end. And you can see just how devastated that he is by that. And, I mean, keep in mind, we've known Avery Brooks we've run as Sisko for what, 20 minutes at this point? And already I'm like, I believe that. There is also, as well, at the end of the scene, as Opaka, to say that she has confidence in Sisko, as she hands him the orb, she goes, "This is the journey you were always destined to take." And as the show goes on, we know that is a statement that only becomes more and more important, which is why, again, that's an up from me. Back aboard the station, we get a very interesting musical cucumbers. I mean, musical cucumbers. Quark has established his business that he is staying. He doesn't really have much choice in the matter, but he has the bar's full, and we have a performer who's playing some sort of marimba xylophone type tower with cucumbers. And if that isn't enough, I don't know what is. Morn is in this scene. That's enough. Oh my goodness. Musical cucumbers. Now there is a line that I take issue with in this scene, and that is Quark is giving out about the Bajorans' ability to make ale, and he says, have it here, "Never trust ale from a God-fearing people." I mean, the Irish did pretty well for a long time, didn't they? So that's a down from me, Quark. That's a down. Speaking of the Irish, you're probably going, "Seán, did you forget Colin Meaney's in this episode?" And I'm not going to lie, I did actually have it marked out that I should have come to it earlier on, because I do want to talk about his goodbye from the Enterprise. And it's very sweet, because he is an established character in the Next Generation. So I'm very glad that they gave him this scene. Indy 5, sorry, very quickly, you're looking for an up-down count. I think I've thrown in a couple of extra ones, but we are about 19 ups to about 3 downs. I say about. But yes, O'Brien's departure from the Enterprise, and you have Picard runs to meet him in the transporter room. And it's just such a touching scene for someone who had been not a background character per se, but certainly someone who popped up every now and again. And so he's wearing the black pip with the gold edge. So I want to talk about this for a second, because I did a bit of a deep dive. So we know that Miles O'Brien is a non-commissioned officer. He's not. He doesn't hold rank save ensign, lieutenant, and so on and so forth. So what he's wearing is the rank insignia of a warrant officer. Now, a warrant officer in this context is usually in charge of a section. They're not officers, but it goes up. You have warrant officer, then you have things like chief warrant officer, and so on. Obviously, we hear O'Brien being referred to as chief. But they are lower in rank, if you like, than, say, ensigns. There's that joke later on, of course, when Nog becomes an ensign and says, O'Brien says he he is now outranked by Nog, and that's true. Of course, no one would ever dream of trying. I say trying to, because he becomes the chief of operations of Deep Space Nine, and that is a title/role that comes with its own responsibility. That's not strictly within the rank structure, but of course it is. There is an awful lot of authority in that, and that's not to say that there isn't a wild inconsistency with what's sitting on O'Brien's collar. That's a carryover from the Next Generation as well, and so for one respect, it both does carry over this inconsistency into DS9, but they very quickly shore it up with his roles in there. Long story medium, Picard kicks him off the ship. Now, Picard is the one to beam O'Brien off the ship, and it's a very sweet full circle moment, and of course it is an up from me. In the scene in Quarks, we're introduced to Rom very briefly, but he is there. He's there in the pilot. We have Morin as well, who I believe I've already upped. But then what we get very quickly is the introduction of Dr. Bashir and Dax. Old man gets an up. Gen 1 Bashir, that's a down. Alexander Siddig, obviously, he was a baby taking on this role. And we did an interview with him over on the Clone Star podcast. We did an interview with him and about how he felt about taking on this role and how, it was fantastic and it was brilliant and everything, but there's a lot to it. Early Bashir is a great way of describing it. He's good at what he does, but he's also a bloody idiot and, quite frankly, a sex pest. He really goes after Dax in those early years, and it's quite uncomfortable to watch. And again, the seeds of that are there in the pilot. He was too young. You really got that fresh out of the academy, but I'm the hot stuff, I know what I'm doing feeling there. And yeah, it was hard to root for the character early on. Now, switching over now to Dax, Terry Farrell had a very difficult job to do, which is, while simultaneously being 28, I need you to play 328 as well. And she has spoken in interviews before about how that was hard. How do you do that? How do you, carry that kind of weight when you haven't lived that kind of experience? And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that every single person in the comments, and myself included, probably haven't lived 328 years of experience. If you have, I owe you a Coke. A definite up as well is the Trill upgrade. When we were introduced to the Trill in the Next Generation episode, the host, they looked very different. And they did do a trial run of that makeup on Terry Farrell. And quite frankly, everyone looked at it and went, can we not cover Terry Farrell in that much prosthetics? And so Michael Westmore readjusted the design and came up with the Trill spots, which of course are still in play today and have, as recently as season 5 of Discovery, played a very important part of the plot. So can we just say, Michael Westmore, thank you very much for making that decision. It's been mentioned in the comments here as well. This scene, Kira versus Bashir, the scene itself, up. And the way she holds him to task, that's an up. Bashir in that scene, I think what he does show is he will run his mouth off without thinking, but when called on it, he does back down. That's how you know that, he's not a terrible, a terrible person by any means. We know that. But sometimes it takes having a bit of cold water thrown on you. And this is this scene for him. We are very quickly then introduced to, and I say this without hyperbole, the greatest villain in Star Trek history. Mark Alimo's Gul Dukat arrives at Deep Space Nine. Take an up. I honestly do not think that there is a more fleshed out villain in all of Star Trek. And I will rank him over Khan. As wonderful as Ricardo Montalban, of course, was as Khan, Dukat takes the biscuit. Because we have seen him pretend to be good. We have seen him delve into full evil. And we have seen so many different sides where you just don't know where you stand with him. And the presence that he has as he walks into the room, and you have that kind of, you couldn't exactly call it banter, but you have that moment where he, forgive my presumption, but until 2 weeks ago, this was my office. And the things we would come to learn about Dukat, that's a very strange thing to kind of boast about. But also there's a moment in this scene as well where he says, I presume you will have no objection to some of my officers enjoying your promenade. And Sisko says, yes, of course. Okay, not specifically these particular Cardassian officers, but the Cardassians did just murder a bunch of Bajorans as they were leaving the station. I thought that was a very weird moment there. I'm going to give it a down. I would have an objection. But this does, of course, lead us to the fact that the Cardassians are doing pretty well at Dabo, to the point where they get duped. I love this scene, because this scene is for a couple of reasons. One is it leads to really showing off what CGI was going to do with Odo, when, of course, he nips aboard the Cardassian ship. But what it also does is it shows the crew working together, because it took me a couple of watches, but I believe Quark was in on it. I believe this is the first example of Quark really working with everyone there, because he has the outrage of my establishment's being closed. What is this about? But he's the one that hands Odo to the Cardassians. So I'm going to say up for synergy. This is all a distraction so that we can get the, get the Rio Grande, taken up, by the way, out to the Dodorius belt, because Dax has identified that that's probably where the orbs are coming from. Just as a sidebar, Dax was very lucky, wasn't she? Because if you think about how rare it is to have an orb experience, and she's just like, do you know what, I'll turn off this force field and just have an orb experience. And it's a great moment of exposition for Dax, and you see her history and how Jadzia came across the Dax symbiont. That just kind of hit me this time going, oh, hang on. Oh yeah, fair play. I've made myself laugh at my notes. Yes, I make myself laugh. I'm that person. And we have we're trying to beam Odo back from the Cardassian ship because he's sabotaged the systems. Beam him back. Here's how the Irish fix things: push the buttons and kick it till it works, and it just beams it back. And if that was an up from just because there's many's a time I've been perhaps a bit too physical with technology, is all I will say about that. We get our, of course, beautiful discovery of and first appearance of the wormhole, which is an up as well. I think that is an effect that has aged so well, in the 30 years it's been since we were introduced to it. And I think it holds up. Inside maybe slightly less so, but there's an awful lot more going on inside, to be fair. But that outside, that absolutely beautiful. This leads to a sort of a rapid succession of scenes where we have Sisko and Dax enter the wormhole. They discover that it's a stable wormhole, that it leads to Gamma Quadrant. So, wonder if that will become important as time goes on. And then flying back through, they are, of course, introduced to the Prophets, which is the whole thing I will talk about now in a moment. But what you have as well is back on the station, this discovery that, this could be one of the most important scientific discoveries of recent time. And the only way to make sure that the Bajorans can stake a claim to this is to get the station out there as quickly as possible. And we get our funny scene. I say funny, but I mean it in a positive way. Our funny scene of bringing the station to basically orbit the wormhole. Obviously, orbit's the wrong word, but to get it beside the wormhole so that they can stake their claim. There's a great moment as well where Kira effectively admits to O'Brien that the Bajorans' claim over the wormhole would be a lot stronger if Starfleet were there as well as an establishing backup presence. And it's just this gentle thawing of Kira throughout the episode, and it really, really works for me. This whole thing. I do love the fact that, do you remember those bubbles that we used to blow? You'd have the little tube where you'd have the solution in it, and you get it and you blow the bubbles out of it, and they get one of those and they surrounded the station, and that's how they move it. Beautiful. Taken up. Colm Meaney is brilliant in this scene, especially when the computer basically keeps telling him, it's like, you are asking me to effectively kill us all. I cannot do this for safety reasons. And he's like, we're going to have a little chat. Just such an up, because now, although we had already been introduced to Miles O'Brien as a character in The Next Generation, again, in the context of Emissary, establishing what kind of character O'Brien was going to be, really, really works. I just want to take a very quick pause for a second. Thank you so much, everyone who's watching along. You are awesome. You are wonderful. Please like this video. Please share. Please subscribe. You are brilliant. And as well, please stay tuned for the rest of the Sisko Day as well. I'm not leaving you yet. Don't worry. But just to give a big shout out and thank you so much again to the Seventh Rule for organizing all of this. Then we get Sisko meets the prophets, and sadly, Jadzia is not invited. She gets transported back to the station, and we get what is not an easy job. How do you explain time to a species that has no concept of time? How do you explain what is one after the other when for them it all happens at the same time? And Avery Brooks, I think, I think he just to the couple of comments who were saying, "Take a drink, thank you." Yeah, I appreciate that. Avery Brooks walks a fabulous path in this section of scenes, because you can see the frustration in his portrayal, but you can also see his excitement to teach the prophets what is linear time, what are humans, and what is reality as he knows it. Bug Manx, forgive me if I pronounce it incorrectly. I always struggle with this, as they clearly do understand because they influence linear events Sisko's birth. Okay, so thank you for bringing that, because that is something I do want to come to. In Sisko's explanation of linear time, and of course his own struggle with linear time, I feel that this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. For them, everything exists at the same time, and the past is the future, and it's all the present together. Although I don't necessarily think that when they were writing Emissary, they had planned what they were going to do with Sisko's journey, I can see an easy connection that would say that meeting Sisko inspired them to create Sisko, because they need Sisko to teach them what linear time is. Now, I know that's a little bit of headcanon, don't get me wrong, but I quite like how perhaps that might work into a self-fulfilling prophecy there. So, how do I say, up for that, up for that entire scene. But there are several lines here that really, really, really resonate. And one is, I don't want to be here. And they ask him, well, why do you exist here? Because for them, why would someone who's trying to tell me that, time is one after the other, and yet they keep going back to this one spot. So surely you don't live in linear time. And it's as much a therapy session as it is one of the greatest examples of first contact in all of Star Trek. And for the first contact element, that is an up for me right there. I think it is beautifully done. I think it is an easy example to call back to, and to say, if someone asks me, how do you do first contact in Star Trek? I will say to them, watch Emissary, because I think it is just perfect. Mark Zutkoff, I want to specifically say up to David Carson for his style in directing this episode. I couldn't agree more. That's another up there for David Carson. The action that's going on sort of outside the wormhole, it's fun. I think Kira versus Jasad, definitely an up. Although that itself does lead to a down, which is one of, God love them, a very wooden line. It's a difficult line to do, which is after Kira talks to Jasad and the line cuts out, O'Brien turns to Kira and says, "Remind me never to play you at Roladin Wild Draw." Look, I get why he didn't say poker. She's Bajoran. But it's very strange. I'm not going to lie. So that was a little down for me, I'm afraid. And Anne-Marie, oh my God, amazing Kira. I completely, look, I agree. That's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. There is, of course, as well, there's a battle happening. You've got 3 Cardassian Galore class warships that are sitting there in front of the station, and they are firing and stuff is exploding, and you've got O'Brien going, "I just fixed the bloody thing." What it does give us, at least, is a moment of Bashir showing that he is a good doctor and he can take charge when he runs down to the promenade as well. And he sort of, barks orders at Odo. And that really works for me. I have it written down here as Bashir's moment of competency. And of course, Bashir will go on to have many, many moments of competency, but it's kind of his one moment of competency in this episode. I'm not going to lie. So back in the Celestial Temple, you have 2 of the key moments of all of Deep Space Nine happen here. And one is, I had to smile. Well, again, think about it. So First Watch, 1993. You have, out of nowhere, we're at a baseball field. We didn't know he loved baseball. We're like, what the heck? There's the Chicago Cubs written on the thing in the background. What's going on? And using the idea of sport as a way of explaining linear time. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I am not the greatest sportsman in the world, nor do I think I will ever be the greatest sportsman in the world. Well, maybe in some alternate reality. And I suppose if all time isn't linear, I could work on that. But it leads to this moment of understanding when Sisko manages to explain to the prophet who is in the form of Jake, as well as the prophets who are in the form of the players, that the game wouldn't be worth playing if we knew what was going to happen. And this is how he explains linear time. That as they encounter and experience time as it unfolds, they don't know what's going to happen. He's asked, how can you take responsibility for your actions if you don't know what's going to happen? And it's that they take responsibility for the consequences because they don't know what's going to happen, but all they can do is deal with it as it happens and learn to live with that, which of course brings us back to we're on board the Saratoga. And the prophets, I think, are finally starting to understand that he can't move on from this moment because he can't deal with the reality of Jennifer not being there anymore. And what you have in this scene is you're being introduced to your lead character. You have been given an hour and a half with this new cast and this new lead actor in Avery Brooks, where you have seen him not be the action hero. You have seen him not, sort of outsmart the villain. You have seen him not try and use Starfleet trickery. He has used diplomacy and his own grief as a way of navigating first contact with this new species. And obviously, as we know, this is how we establish our ongoing relationship with the prophets and everything that would fall on from there. But in this moment where Sisko is broken and understands why he's broken and sees that what he needs to do to move on from there is a tour de force performance from Avery Brooks, and it was, without question, the easiest latinum up I think I've ever given. And I mean, it's not like we're not going to see some incredible acting from Avery Brooks again as the show goes on. You could do list upon list upon list of the times Avery Brooks showed you what acting really was. But it's right there, and I keep saying this, in the pilot, there it is. So there it is. This convinces the prophets, okay, this guy might be worth dealing with. I think we should arrange his birth. He then rescues Dukat. There was a whole plot where Dukat gets stranded, and that's why Jasada's annoyed, and Dukat comes back and then tells the other Cardassians to get lost. And we get that last scene as well, where Sisko, I don't think he's forgiven Picard, but he certainly is able to put the mission and what needs to happen next. But, you know, that's now the important thing, and holding this grudge is not important. And you get this handshake. You know, it's not a declaration of friendship or anything of the sort, but you do get, I think this is a moment of understanding between the two men, and it really works. It really works. And then, you know, it more or less straight away we get into the day-to-day life. We have, you know, walking the promenade. We have already got requests for different ships to come in and dock. We know now that DS9 is going to be important. There is a funny moment. I've called it the mission statement of the episode, where Captain Picard says, effectively, this will become one of the most important ports in the Federation. I was like, all right, that's a pretty confident statement there. But as we know from the 7 years that followed, it really did. And then we close out on that. So I'm coming up on time. So just really quickly, there are so many things in this episode that make this, in my opinion, the best Star Trek pilot of them all. I think there are fabulous examples, but Emissary has it all. It has everything in the DNA of itself that would be built upon and established and then confirmed as the show would go on. And of course, look, there is no show that is not without, you know, rocky ground. I mentioned to move along home earlier on. But in this message of grief is growth if you can move beyond the moment, that's a big statement for a new show to make. And right there as well, which it needs to be highlighted because of how important it is the relationship between Avery Brooks and Cirroc Lofton, Ben Sisko and Jake Sisko. It's right there in episode 1, and it's a crucial plot and it's a crucial storyline as the show goes on. You wouldn't see it every episode. You know, there were quite a few episodes where Cirroc Lofton doesn't appear, but when it does, you see a pure example of family in Star Trek. And again, it's all there in the trailer. So there it is. That is why I think Emissary is the greatest Trek pilot of them all. So that brings us more or less up to time now in this video. So please do stick around for the rest of the Sisko day. Dr. Trek himself, Larry Nemeczek, will be taking up the reins in, I think less than 60 seconds. Thank you so much. You're all wonderful. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Everyone who left comments, it means the world. Thank you so much for reaching out. Thank you for helping me be a part of this. Thank you so much to the Seventh Rule for inviting me to be a part of this. And yeah, if you've got any questions, anything else, drop them in the comments below. I will try and get back to them. Lovely, very, very, very lovely comments here. Yous are wonderful. I really appreciate it. And now, okay, everyone, UK side of things, Ireland side of things, go to bed. It's a school night. And everyone in the US side of things, go to bed. It's a school night. Thanks so much for following me. Ellie, are you late? You're here, and that's the important thing to remember. You're wonderful. This is actually well timed, so I'm just about to run out of voice. Thank you so much.